Hey everyone, this is Feng. In the previous video on Dama-Ten, we have went through on how to see through people's Dama-Ten based on whether the player is discarding a very dangerous tile in a very dangerous situation. At the end of the day, you will have a good understanding of Dama-Ten and how to deal with it. We first need to understand why people actually choose to Dama-Ten. Modern theory has shown that in second row and onwards, it's better to actually Dama-Ten because the benefit from getting Riichi's value is not so much in exchange for the reductions of win rate in second row. For example, you might Riichi for the extra hunt, but the extra hunt doesn't necessarily add to your upgrade from Mangan to Haneman. It's only like 50% of the chance. And that jump is only from 8,000 to 12,000 with 50%. If you get 50% times another 50%, that's like a 25% of your value increment from 8k to 12k, a total net of 2,000. But Riichi actually reduce your win rate by 30%. The second reason people why choose Dama-Ten is actually to snipe a player's Genbutsu, which is rather common in many of the games, especially intermediate players' games. The third reason is that situation might be looked too dangerous for the player to commit to a Riichi in their situations. So the player might want to Dama-Ten in case that this person will want to fully defense after drawing certain extraordinary dangerous tile. The fourth reason is that they are looking for opportunities to improve their weight, or they are trying to increase the value of their hand by chasing certain Yaku, for example, Sanshoku. Among these four reasons, reason 1 is definitely the most expensive, followed by reason 2, but reason 2 is more of an average value, which I'll go through later on. Reason 3 and 4 are most likely to be cheap. So in this video, we are going to focus more on the reason 1 and 2. We'll examine how likelihood are they going to happen and how likely they are going to be expensive. So from a pure mathematical perspective, every game actually has only 6.3 Doras instead of 7 if you take away the Dead War. And in a starting hand, which is turn 1, if you have no Doras in your hand, every player actually has on average 1 Dora in their hand. By turn 7, there will be around 1.4, and by turn 13, there will be around 1.8. The average number of turns for players to reach Riichi or to reach Tenpai is around 8.5. So to make things simple, let's assume that a player will have around 1.5 Dora, assuming you have no Dora in your hand, and to be 1.5. So if you actually get sniped by a Dama-Ten, that players is going to have 1.5 Dora on average and 1 Yaku. So that makes it around 2 to 3 Han, and that means on average 3,000 points. Of course, it can be 8,000, but it can also be 1,000. So this is what I mean by an average value. And I've also emphasized this on the first video. Even if you can predict 100% whether the player is in Dama-Ten or not, it's important to first defend against the first player in Riichi, and only defend both if you have enough safe tile. If you look at the overall likelihood, first row Dama-Ten is very difficult, right? If you look at the math perspective, one player is only going to have 1 Dora on average, assuming you have no Doras in your hand. And to make a Mangan from that means you need 1 Yaku and 3 Doras, or 2 Yakus, 3 Doras. What's the likelihood of someone Dama a pinful Tanyao hand? If you look at the statistic of Yakus, around 20-ish% get Tanyao, around 20% around is pinful. Put them together, you only get around 5 to 10% that these 2 Yaku comes together. And for them to happen with 2 Doras in first row, it's actually very, very difficult. Also, some players might also prefer to Riichi on first row, depending on which theory they're applying. So actually, first row getting hit by a Mangan is very, very rare. And if that happens to you, you just have to pat your back and accept that this is part of Mahjong. It's like no matter how safe you try to drive on the road, someone can still bang into you. And that has nothing to do with you. That's life and that's Mahjong. So what about second row? If the player is actually is very aggressive in discarding dangerous tile in second row without hesitation, so including like even double Musuji Dora, this person is likely to be Dama-Ten or Mangan. Although most of the time in higher level players, they are just going to Riichi because they know other players are going to catch it. But in lower level players, they still hope that the newbie are still going to rely on defending that Riichis and discard the Genbutsu and deal into his or her Mangan. So for third row, the likelihood of Mangan is going to be a lot higher, especially if you don't see any Dora in your hand in third row. And that's where it really matters, because if you don't see Doras in third row in your hand, that means every other players are going to have near 2 Doras in their hand. And since your win rate is already quite low in third row, and you are not in Tenpai, This is where you need to hone your skills to avoid dealing into expensive Dama-Ten. But here's the complication. What if there are no signs in third row that players are actually like discarding dangerous tiles or any dangerous situations? How can we see through it and avoid it? The answer is actually you don't. The trick here is that you have to judge whether this tile that you're about to push is worth this 10 to 15% doing rate. You assume Dama-Ten is lurking around in third row. So I repeat, you do not care, you do not try to find out whether a particular player is Dama-Ten in third row when there's no any obvious signs. It's just impossible to tell. It is more of a push-pull judgment. Right, let's look at an example. In this situation, this player is Ten, Mangan, or a potential Mangan if Riichi, main Tanpin Ipeiko, potential Ipeiko with 1 Dora. And he drew a rather dangerous, or rather something that is not out yet, a 5p. And he has a chance to discard a Tong or discard the 5p here. The recommended answer will be to buy time, because in third row, everyone is at least Ten. So your win rate is going to be rather low. Your benefit here is about a K-10 kind of points, so which is around 1000 to 1500. So even if you're Mangan, but you're Ten, at Ten, your value is going to be like 1 to 2000. Because by the time you hit Tenpai, you're only left with like 2 or 3 draws. That win rate of the Mangan is going to be like 5%. Right? One tile is 3%, right? So you have 2 draws, it's only going to be 3 to 6%. So it is better to discard a Tong here. And in actual, it's true that they are already Dama-Tens. So one is Dama-Ten, a cheap hand, and one is Dama-Ten, a Mangan. Of course, on hindsight, 5p doesn't deal into anyone here, but it is very possible. So this is more of a push-pull judgment. There's no need to push a 10 to 15% win rate at this point in time when your win rate is rather low and your weight seems quite bad, because you have to actually chi 3-6 as twice, or rather draw them twice of the same tile, which is quite difficult. And also, even if you get to K10 later on, it's going to be a bad weight. So to summarize from my first video to this video, the only key information to find out whether someone is Dama-Ten is through assessing the danger level of their discard in a dangerous situation. It is impossible to tell if there is no dangerous situations. And also, assessing danger level of a tile requires intermediate to advanced skills, such as you have to count Suji and you have to look at certain kind of discard reading to know how dangerous that tile is. You should worry about getting sniped by Dama-Ten only if you're doing a Ten push-pull judgment. So for example, you think that the player is Dama-Ten and someone is in Riichi, right? Usually you only have a push-pull judgment Ten against the Riichi. But now that if you see 2 players are actually in Tenpai, you should actually defend at that time. So again, this is a more advanced topic. The focus is more on defending against the Riichi player first, followed by the Dama-Ten player. And lastly, defending against Dama-Ten is more of a push-pull judgment and assumes that they're actually in Dama-Ten rather than trying to figure out whether they are in Dama-Ten or not. But of course, I don't mean that, after going through so much about Dama-Ten and only to tell you that it's a push-pull judgment, it can feel kind of demoralizing, but especially if you are starting new, it's best not to care about Dama-Ten. They only make a difference at very high level play. But there are some quick tips I can share with you right now from this is that, number 1, you can afford to push more even at third row when the Dora is honor, because it is difficult to get a Mangan Dama-Ten when the Dora is honor tile. You actually need them to pair up or use it as uncle to use. And also they don't mix well with like Pinfu or Tanyao. So they have fewer Yakus to actually make a Mangan Dama-Ten. But do be careful if you actually notice someone seems to have very irregular discard. Some players do Dama on Chitoi hands and waiting on the Honor Dora to catch people off guard that even third row, some players are still pushing Honor Dora tiles. So this might be something that you might have to be careful of. The second point is that feel free to push terminal tiles in third row because they don't get hit by Tanyao. And if let's say a player is waiting on 1-4 and the 4 gives them a Tanyao Mangan while 1 gives them a Pinfu 3-9, it is usually more advisable to Riichi from a modern theory perspective. So that will be the more optimal move they use. But if you still get hit by such thing, then these players are not really playing optimally and you should not be too bothered by it. Also, terminals don't get hit by the Akaset of 5. The third point will be careful of pushing 3-6 Suji and 4-7 Suji because they actually form the Aka. So they are more likely, so they are more easier to push if you actually have the Aka inside you. So for example, you have a Aka 5S and you draw a 6S, it's easier to push your 6S than compared to another 6M where you do not have the Aka 5M with you. So sometimes I do think that these Suji are actually more dangerous than 5, but of course, 5 is, if it's a double Musuji, then naturally it's more dangerous than 3-6, 4-7, especially in Tanyao, because 5 is the only double Musuji in the case of Tanyao, even though they don't get hit by Dora, but at least if it times 2 the dueling rate, it is actually more than the point you lose from dueling into a 25% chance of getting Akadora. But one more thing to be careful on is one chance. For example, you see 3-5S and only the Aka is not there. So to try to justify saying that, oh, it's one chance and therefore you should push this 3-6 or 4-7, you have to be very careful. Or at least you have to have that mentally preparedness to that you might do it into a Mangan because that is going to fit into the last Aka set. That's all for Dama-Ten. If you find this video useful for you, please subscribe and like. Please remember to leave some comments on the section below as I'll continue to make more videos like this to improve your gameplay. So tell me what kind of videos you would like to see more in the future. And I'll see you in the next video.